I am a 17-year-old male, and I recently learned how to ride a bike. Yes, it's a bit late, but the opportunity never really presented itself when I was younger. I practiced on a flat road that led up to a graveyard, with only a few cars passing by every now and then, which made it perfect for learning how to ride. After getting comfortable, I decided to ride through downtown instead of sticking to the same straight road. This way I could practice turning corners and navigating around people. Everything was going well as I started riding up the path until I entered the back street off the main street. This route had far fewer pedestrians, as it only had a couple of side streets and an abandoned building. As I rode through, I found myself trying to squeeze past two pollards and a white car, and things got tricky. I tried to steer clear of the car, but I ended up hitting it and panicked. I got off my bike, walked to the front of the car, and looked into the window to apologize. Inside were two men, both around 20 years old, and they didn't look well put together. They wore gray tracksuits that were stained with orange and yellow marks. One of them exclaimed that they thought a terrorist attack had happened when someone hit their car, while the other man got out to assess the minor damage. At that point, I panicked even more. I picked up my bike and tried to get away. I pedaled halfway down the long street, my legs feeling weak and regret already setting in, but then the car caught up with me. They drove alongside me, forcing me to veer onto the pathway and stop. They blocked my path, and one of them shouted, "We're gonna get you for this." The other man got out of the car. I started apologizing profusely, explaining that it was one of my first times riding a bike, but he ignored me and kept advancing. I just stood there, frozen, not knowing what to do. He grabbed my arm and I shouted for help as he tried to drag me towards the car. I pleaded desperately, offering to pay for the damage and do anything to make it right, but he kept pulling me as he reached for the car door. By then we were in a street, and a woman opened her door. I glanced over and started screaming for help. She yelled at the men, demanding to know what they were doing. They paused, exchanged a look, and then the man released my arm. Both of them got back into the car and drove off. The woman shouted at me to get the license plate number, but I was in such a state of shock that all I could do was pick up my bike and ride back home. I don't know what happened to those men or if the woman ever took any further action. All I know is that I never want to ride a bike again. I was 8 or 9 at the time. I was an extremely skinny, small little girl for my age. I lingered at the very bottom of the height and weight charts at the doctor's office. Adults often mistook me for a 6-year-old, which I absolutely hated. It was summertime and my mom was home making lunch. I asked if I could go ride my bike. The rule was, no riding around the block, just to the corner and back. We lived in a very small, quiet town on a street that hardly ever saw traffic, unless it was the neighbors coming or going. My corner was about 8 houses down from my own house. I was cruising along on my new bike when I hit a bumpy spot on the sidewalk incorrectly and crashed pretty hard. I lay there, twisted around my bike, shaking. My helmet had fallen off because I never buckled the chin strap. I felt shaky and worried I'd get in trouble for not buckling my helmet strap, assuming my mom saw me. Maybe 30 seconds passed, and a car drove up to me at that corner. I heard it stop, and a man's voice said, "Oh, honey, are you okay?" I was trying not to cry at this point. I looked up, expecting to see a neighbor, but I saw a stranger. The man looked dirty, and his car was filled with all kinds of garbage piled up to the windows. The car itself was rusty. He had pulled up so close that he was almost on the sidewalk in front of me. He stayed in his car but leaned far out of the driver's side window with the door slightly ajar, looking at me. Then he said, "Come on, I'll take care of you." I lied and said I wasn't hurt. He got angry with me and insisted he'd just take me home. I remember thinking, where would I even sit? I repeated, "I'm not hurt." He then said, "If you're not hurt, you have to prove it." So with all the strength I had, I untangled my legs and stood up. The man gave me a terrible angry look, then peeled out and disappeared. I was so scared. I ran home on shaky legs crying, leaving my bike and helmet behind. I told my mother what had happened, and after lunch she walked down to retrieve my bike and helmet. As an adult, I asked her if she remembered that incident. She told me that when she walked to the corner to grab my things, she saw the tire tracks right up to the sidewalk. The car had pulled so far over that it blocked me from view of anyone driving by. She thought the man might have tried to kidnap me, but wasn't entirely sure. I was told that he probably just wanted to help, but then reminded again not to talk to strangers. If I needed help, I should only talk to a mommy with kids. I think that the dirty-looking man wanted to take me. He probably saw what he assumed was a 5 or 6-year-old and was disappointed when I wasn't young enough or hurt enough to easily grab. It still creeps me out, thinking about how angry he got. If he had been a tiny bit nicer, I might not be alive today. This happened in June of 2015 when I was 15 and ended a couple of months ago in May 2016. I live in a pretty shady town, which has plenty of sexual predators and trashy people. I'll call it PBP. PBP is a weird town. You get in there and it's like you're on a new planet. You feel very off, like something is wrong. It's not something you feel immediately, but after like half a year of living there, you begin to realize it. So one day my dad and I were walking down the street to go catch the bus. This random man, who looked like he was in his 50s, was riding a bicycle down the street. We didn't pay any attention to him, as we were caught up in our own conversation about what we had to buy at Walmart. We only paid him any mind when he stopped and got off his bicycle, staring at me. I instantly felt uncomfortable, but tried to smile and be polite. I figured I was just being irrationally scared. He came up to us and said, "Sir, I would just like to say that your daughter is the most beautiful woman I have ever seen in my whole entire life. I would like to marry her." I instantly froze, and my smile faltered. I couldn't believe he had just said that. Then my dad shifted so that he could be in front of me and said, "She's 15. The man gave a creepy smile which showed off his nasty yellow teeth. "Well then, come and find me when you're 18, sweetheart." After that, he rode off. I was a bit scared but figured I wouldn't see him again. After all, I don't leave the house very often. We got onto the bus and I forgot about the whole thing after about 10 minutes. My dad and I did our shopping, came home and put all of our stuff away. When we were done, we decided to sit on the porch outside because we were hot and the house didn't have air conditioning. We were only out there for about 5 minutes and the same man from earlier came riding by on his bicycle. He glanced over at me but kept riding. My dad went inside to go get a cup of coffee and this guy came riding by again. He did it a couple more times, each time looking at me, until I finally decided to tell my dad and go inside. Even when I was sitting on my couch inside, peeking out the window, I saw him go by 2 more times. I didn't leave the house for a straight week after that. I had heard so many stories about girls being assaulted and raped and kidnapped, even murdered. That became one of my biggest fears, and still is. After that week, I decided that I needed some air. I went for a walk down to the Family Dollar, which is about a 15-minute walk. On the way there, I wasn't confronted by anyone. I got an occasional "hello, how are you" from some people sitting on their porches, but that was about it. On the way back, I felt calmer. I figured the creepy man had forgotten about me. I was listening to music and zoning out, barely aware of my surroundings, when the same guy from earlier came around the corner on his bike and stopped in front of me. I don't think he had been following me. I think he had just been riding around, because when he saw me, he briefly looked shocked. Then he gave me that same nasty smile, blocked my way, and said, "Hello, sweetheart. Haven't seen you in a week." I tried to smile, but I felt my heart drop. I shrugged and told him that I was just feeling a little sick and needed some time to rest. He was still smiling and got a little closer to me. I was very close to kicking him in his shins and running to the hair salon behind me. "I'm never giving up, you know," he said before looking me up and down and riding off. I breathed in and ran to my house. For the next couple of weeks, I would only leave the house if my sister had to go somewhere and was driving, or if my dad was walking with me. When he saw I was with someone, he wouldn't say anything, just smile. When he did see me run into stores, he would cycle around them for a couple of minutes and just wait for me until someone came out with me. For the next 10 months, when I saw him, I would try and duck somewhere and avoid him, or I'd run into a store. The barbershop owners and a lot of his customers know me because I was constantly running in there and asking him if I could hide for a couple of minutes. They have a habit of watching out for me and having someone walk up to the store with me when they see me go by. I think the only reason that man stopped bothering me was because the last time I saw him, he grabbed my arm so hard it left bruises, got in my face, and said, "I see you avoiding me. Why are you avoiding me, sweetheart? All I want is you." His eyes were wild and saliva was practically pouring from his mouth. He smelled horrible. I screamed so loud that I swear people from China could hear me. I was in front of the barber shop that day, thank God, and the owner and one of his customers came running out, one with scissors. They came after him and he ended up speeding away on his bike. I still see him walking around, but when he sees me, he avoids me. I think he had a drug problem, and the last time he confronted me, he was on something really bad. But not once during that entire ordeal did I inform the cops. I guess I was just too determined to think that he'd leave me alone on his own time after he got bored. My mom was always very cautious about the bad things that could happen to her children. She would take all three of us, my brother, sister, and me, to school in the morning because she worked close to the time school started. I had been begging her to let me bike to school since I got a new bike for my birthday a few months earlier, and she finally agreed. I was in grade 7, so I was 12 or 13 years old, and female. My school was about a 3-minute drive or a 15-minute bike ride away. I was eager to ride my new bike to school, especially since I had also gotten a new helmet and bike lock to go with it. School started at around 8:30, so I left at about 8. I liked hanging out in the yard with my friends before school started, so I always went early. The route to school was pretty straightforward, a single main road through the city. Since it was 8 in the morning, it was relatively bright outside, and I was on a well-populated main road with people heading to work or school. About halfway to school, I decided to cross the street, but not at a crosswalk or traffic light, essentially jaywalking while biking. As I stopped in someone's driveway and looked both ways to cross, I noticed a black car pull up to my left and park on the side of the road. It was a 2-door Honda Civic type car from what I can remember, with all its windows tinted. I didn't think much of it at the time. I assumed I might be blocking the driver's access to their driveway, so I continued trying to cross the street. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a man dressed in all black with his hood pulled up to hide his face. He got out of the driver's side, walked around the back of the car, and before I could fully comprehend what was happening, he opened the passenger side door and grabbed my arm, attempting to pull me off my bike and into his car. For what felt like an eternity, it seemed as though every car on the street had disappeared. Any hope of help was gone. One of the busiest streets in my city suddenly felt like a desolate gravel road in the middle of nowhere. It felt like a horrible nightmare where you try to scream but nothing comes out. But this was real. I couldn't scream. The feeling was exactly like a nightmare, except there was no waking up from it. Since I had no idea what to do in a situation like this, I had never even imagined it happening, I went with the first thought that crossed my mind. Aim for the nuts. I shifted my weight to my right leg and kicked as hard as I could with my left. I landed one kick, which hurt my ankle a bit, so I can only imagine what it felt like on the receiving end. He instantly let go. I didn't even look before crossing the street. I biked as fast as I could. I remember trying to turn around to get a license plate, but my eyes were too watery from the tears streaming down my face, and I still couldn't make a sound. Since my mom would have been at work by then, I continued biking to school, silently crying the entire way. When I reached the schoolyard, I dropped my bike without caring to lock it, or ever wanting to ride it again, frankly. The school's front door was locked all the time, and you had to ring a doorbell to get in. I did exactly that. The secretary reminded me that I still had time to play outside before class started, and that's when I was finally able to speak again. "I need to call my mom," I screamed. The door opened instantly. I explained what happened to the secretary, then the principal, my mom, and finally the police. I refused to talk to the police until I had spoken with my mom. The police arrived at the school shortly afterward and took my statement, and later I went to the station with my mom to give another statement. A business across the street from where it happened had video surveillance, but it only captured the bottom 6 inches of the guy's car pulling up, his footsteps around the back of the car, and then the car pulling away shortly after. Essentially, there were no solid leads on who this man was. The same man with the same body and car description went on to attempt to kidnap 3 other girls but was never caught. I don't really believe in a God, but I do pray that he was and will always be unsuccessful. This story happened a while ago, but it still messes with my mind. I live in a quiet countryside where usually nothing happens. I'm an 18-year-old girl who can easily walk around my hometown alone without feeling scared because it's really safe here. Basically no crime. So, as usual, my dog and I went for a walk one evening. It was nice weather, so I decided to head to a nearby field. I usually let my dog off her leash there so she can have fun running around. She's a nice dog and always comes when I call her. We reached the field, and everything seemed fine. There was nothing out of the ordinary, except I had this kind of odd feeling in my gut that I rarely experience. The last time I had the same feeling was when I was 8 years old and we were driving at night with my family. Back then, I told my parents, "I feel like something is wrong. You should be careful." I was oddly serious at that moment, and they slowed down. A minute later, a deer came out of nowhere, and we would have crashed if we had kept going at the same speed. We were all shocked, and my mom thanked me. I still remember it like it was yesterday. In the field, 10 years later, I had the same gut feeling. I brushed it off, thinking, whatever, and kept going, completely ignoring it. We roamed around the fields and a nearby forest until sunset began. I put my dog back on her leash and decided to leave via one of the tiny paths that cut through a small forest. It was the quickest way home. It wasn't a popular route, but it was faster. As I was walking along that path, I suddenly noticed a silhouette at the end of the road, just before the forest began. I thought nothing of it and kept walking, but a few moments later, I felt that strong gut feeling again. I stared at the silhouette for a while and realized it was staring at me without moving. At first I thought it might be a child waiting for someone, but as I got closer, I saw it wasn't a child. It was a grown man riding a child's bicycle. It was a blue-green boy's bike, and he looked completely out of place. His legs were far too long for it, and his whole body seemed forced onto the tiny frame. It was an unsettling sight. Still, I didn't want to turn around and waste time, even though it was creepy. I thought, maybe he's waiting for someone coming from my direction? But every step I took, he followed me with an intense expression. I was about 20 meters away when he started doing weird jumps on his bike, smiling the ugliest, most unsettling smile I've ever seen, and staring at me with wide eyes. He looked as though he was expecting something, jumping with excitement. He appeared to be in his 50s, with very long and thin limbs, bald and wearing that creepy smile. That's when my alarm bells went off. I glanced behind me, but no one was there. It was just me, an 18-year-old girl with a fluffy, definitely not a guard dog. I turned around 360 degrees and began to jog back the way I came, just in case. I glanced at him and sighed with relief when I saw he wasn't following me. I thought maybe he wasn't waiting for me after all and called myself stupid and scared. I was so wrong. My adrenaline started to slow down as I walked through the middle of the field, seeing no sign of him. I let my dog off her leash again and she started running around. I was almost at the end of the field, just a kilometer or so of forest before home, when my dog suddenly spotted a rabbit, deer, or something and bolted. I panicked because she'd never done that before. I called her name loudly over and over, and eventually she came back. I was relieved nothing had happened to her. But as I put her back on the leash, I saw something out of the corner of my eye. The same bald man with long legs was biking towards me. He wasn't looking at the ground. He was staring right at me. Freak out doesn't even describe what I felt. I have never seen anyone look so deranged. What surprised me most was that he was biking across a field, a difficult field with muddy ponds that you had to jump over, but somehow he was managing it. He was struggling but still pedaling through the mud, all while keeping that terrifying white smile. I didn't look for another second. I just ran. I ran as fast as I could, even though I have asthma. I saw black spots and felt like my lungs were going to collapse, but adrenaline kept me moving. I glanced back once and saw him struggling to maintain speed through the field on that ridiculously small bike, still smiling. I kept running until I found a house and hid in the yard without a second thought, not caring that I was trespassing. It didn't matter at that moment. I waited with my breath stuck in my throat, but he never came. I planned to scream as loudly as I could if he found me, but he didn't. Eventually, the adrenaline wore off and I left my hiding spot. I ran again until I reached an area with multiple people in their yards, hoping to find help if I saw him again. Thankfully, I didn't. I typed 911 into my phone but couldn't bring myself to call. I had no proof and I didn't want my parents to find out because they're overprotective. They would probably never let me leave the house again. I've been paranoid ever since that incident, and my dog seemed frightened too. I think she sensed something was really wrong. I swear to God I will always listen to my gut from now on. I'm still scared of him and expect to randomly see him somewhere. I can't forget his awful smile. I feel like he's going to appear at my window one night and do whatever he wants. I feel paranoid and helpless and am still thinking about calling the police. Last week, I was hanging out with some friends at a local smoke spot. Eventually, around 1 a.m., I started feeling pretty tired, so I decided to head home while still stoned, thinking I could spend some time browsing Reddit before going to bed since I was high as a kite. It's about a 30-minute ride back to my house on my skateboard, but there's a shortcut closer to my house that involves a long, secluded bike trail. This shortcut usually cuts at least 5 minutes off the trip because it's mostly downhill. Nobody is usually on this trail, especially not that late at night. It's also pitch black since there's no lighting, and it gets especially dark when I reach the middle of the trail. While riding down, I noticed an odd light ahead of me that looked like a flashlight. The light flashed over to me and then immediately went out. I didn't think much of it. Maybe it was just some kids smoking on the trail who got spooked when they saw someone. Probably not a big deal. I continued riding until I was within eye distance of where I saw the light. I noticed there was nobody around on the trail where the light had been. I thought it was possible the person just kept walking down the trail, but I have pretty good eyesight and didn't see any shadows or movement ahead of me. It seemed like whoever had been there either disappeared or was hiding. Being the paranoid person that I am, I got off my board and held it in my hand, just in case someone wanted to mug me. Of course, in my head, I was also thinking it might be a serial killer, because I'm naturally paranoid, was high, and spend way too much time on reading horror stories. I continued walking forward, still holding my board. The trail was lined with bushes and trees, and I thought I saw a lone shadowy figure standing behind a bush and between two trees, trying to stay hidden. My oh fuck sensors immediately went off. I shone my phone's flashlight in that direction and saw a middle-aged man standing behind the bush between the trees, just staring at me with a creepy blank expression. There was something sinister about his stare, and it made me incredibly uncomfortable. I kept moving forward, panicking internally. As I passed him, I expected him to try and attack me, but he just continued to stare silently, even turning his head slowly to follow me as I moved. When I got a short distance ahead, I glanced back and saw that he had started following me at a brisk pace. I immediately noped the hell out of there, jumped on my board, and rode away faster than I ever had before. When I looked back one last time before getting too far away, he had stopped following me but was just standing there in the middle of the trail, staring at me. I got home shortly after and was completely freaked out. It was a terrifying encounter I'd rather not experience again,